it puts the message is a paraphrase of the original texts that tries to put the Bible in the most contemporary language.
Yeah. And all this came from the unicorn on Jeopardy. And nobody got it right.
Anyway, hello to anyone who's joining us. We're
So
live.
A wild what? A wild donkey? A wild ox.
So what chapter are we on?
20.
20. You really ran through them last time.
But we've been talking about translation questions and issues do matter. Getting the translation right can make a difference
Sure.
in a lot of cases on some pretty important issues. For instance, I think on Sunday I referenced one in Romans when Paul says every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. The original Greek, the best translation of that word, in the Greek, that word means a joyful, willing bowing down. It's not a forced bowing down. And so it really, and to some extent that matters.
Joy out of a worshiper as a
Well, but it says that one day everyone will
no.
joyfully confess that Jesus is Lord, not just be forced to acknowledge. And that makes a difference in the way you look at how things are going to turn out. So translation, and I can give other examples too, but translation issues matter. But I really think it's important to debunk the idea that the King James is in any sense superior to more recent or more modern translations. There's nothing wrong with it, but it is not better. Actually, technically, the newer translations are better. They are more accurate and more faithful to the original than the King James. And it's not going to, ruin your salvation or anything to read the King James at all, but it's definitely not better. And the way that, unfortunately, the way that idea gets spread is, frankly, pastors who don't know, pastors who aren't properly educated. They probably can't read Greek. They don't understand how the Bible is translated. And that's not really their fault, I guess, but it's it's a reason why Presbyterians require their pastors to be educated.
Yeah, and I'm pastor Greek and about 5 other languages.
It happened. Hello, Patty. This happens. People have been doing ministry now for almost 15 years, and sometimes when I tell people things, they give me looks like, "What are you saying?" And it's because I'm saying something that might go against what they heard in Sunday school or growing up or something like that from a trusted teacher. And I've learned to be understanding about that. It can be uncomfortable for people to hear information that makes them question what they were told in the past. And that can be uncomfortable for people.
I don't remember much of anything, but I do the church. People would bring their own Bibles. I was encouraged. It happened in the pews, but
Yeah.
they didn't put. And the idea of follow what we're doing here in your Bible. Be satisfied that it's an agreement kind of thing. I think that's the indication. So people are pretty good at getting get to the page, sitting in the pew, and
Yeah.
when you're all ready, everybody has it, okay, and then you start. That's been different here and other places I've visited too.
Yeah.
And it might be maybe because it was more of a country area, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people were,
All right, so we are doing Proverbs. We should probably dig in are we in chapter 20?
Started.
Okay, that's what I've got to. Good. Chapter 20, verse 1. So if you got your Bibles at home, chapter 20 of Proverbs, verse 1. Again, we're going to go pretty fast. So I'm going to go fast, so stop me if you see something you want to ask about, or that strikes you, or says, hey, what is that about? Please do stop me, because otherwise I'm just going to go. And I might comment on things I find interesting, but that I don't want to discount questions you might have, especially when I'm going so fast, because a lot of it's repetitive. Okay, chapter 20. Wine is a mocker and beer a brawler. Whoever is led astray by them is not wise. A king's wrath is like the roar of a lion. He who angers him forfeits his life. It is to a man's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. Notice how some of these proverbs are giving directions, saying, you should behave this way, you should do this, you should do that. Other proverbs are merely descriptive. For example, the proverb about the king's wrath. I mean, there's no advice there, right? It's not telling you to do anything. There's no command, there's no prescription for how to live. It's just a descriptive statement that a king's wrath is, you get in trouble when you upset the king. So noticing the differences, that doesn't mean that that's the way kings should be, right? That's not a piece of advice for kings. It's not telling a king how to rule. It's not telling anybody anything, really, other than a description. Does that make sense? And the same thing is true of the verse about the wine. It just says, there is a little bit of a warning there, that if you go the route of wine and beer and you become essentially an addict, that's going to lead you to ruin. Okay, verse... What?
It's kind of a warning, or
yeah.
Considered.
It's a statement of fact.
Yep. Alcohol can be dangerous.
And provoking the king.
And provoking a king can be dangerous, right? A sluggard does not plow in season, so at harvest time he looks but finds nothing. So a sluggard would be like a lazy person. So a lazy person doesn't plow when they're supposed to plow. They procrastinate, they don't do it, they lay around, and then when it's harvest, they don't have what they need, right? The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Excuse me, that's interesting. The scientists study different fields, right? Some scientists study rocks, some study volcanoes, some study stars, some study plants. But what it's saying here is that the most difficult thing in life to understand is the inner workings of a human being. Right? And that's true even of ourselves, right? To understand how the mind works, how its desires function. The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters. That meaning they're a deep mystery. They're hard to understand. So someone who studies people, psychologists, sociologists, that is the most difficult and most mysterious subject. Why are people the way they are? Why do they do the things they do? Verse 6, many a man claims to have unfailing love, but a faithful man who can find? Right? People are not loyal. that's sort of a complaint, really. That's not advice. That's sort of got a lament and a statement of how things are. People claim to be faithful and loyal, but very few of them actually are, is what it's saying. Verse 7. So there is a pessimism that runs throughout Proverbs, right? The world is not a totally safe place. There are deceivers in the world. There are liars. There are betrayers. There are seductive women. There are, the world is very much not a safe place for the book of Proverbs. And so a lot of this are warnings, right? Aware of the dangers in life. What are the things you have to be careful of? The righteous man leads a blameless life. Blessed are his children after him. When a king sits on his throne to judge, he winnows out all evil with his eyes. Right? That's sort of an ideal. A good leader's job is to see evil and good, right? And reward. And Paul says this in Romans 13, right? The purpose of government is to punish evil and reward good. That's what, and God has instituted government for that purpose. And so a king's job is to be able to tell the difference, right? If the government's job is to reward good and punish evil, the key quality the leader needs to have is to know the difference between good and evil. Who can say, I have kept my heart pure, I am clean and without sin? That's another sort of a lament. It's like, right, who's without sin? Where is the right? There's very few righteous people. And again, that's part of the pessimism that we find here in Proverbs. Differing weights and differing measures, the Lord detests them both, right? That refers to commerce. Back then you weighed things, this much grain, this much gold. That's how you knew how things were worth. And people would cheat with, like loaded scales that would be in their favor. So this refers to corrupt business practices. And you've heard this before, so let's keep going. Even a child is known by his actions, by whether his conduct is pure and right. Ears that hear and eyes that see, the Lord has made them both. Do not love sleep, or you will grow poor. Stay awake, and you will have food to spare. That's sort of a condemnation of laziness. Verse 12, the ears that hear and eyes that see, right? God's given you, it's like the saying, you hear this from parents, right? God gave you a brain, use it. God gave you eyes and ears. Look, perceive, think, right? And that's advice not just for children, for adults too. Use your brain. Use your eyes. Look closely. Test, examine. Don't trust everything right off the bat. It is no good, says the buyer. Then he goes and boasts about his purchase. Yes, that sounds like online shopping. Gold there is, and rubies in abundance, but lips that speak knowledge are a rare jewel. There's that contrast again, over and over, that knowledge and learning are more valuable than gold and jewels. Take the garment of one who puts up security for a stranger, hold it in pledge if he does it for a wayward woman. I'm not really sure what that means. You put up a garment in security, like collateral, right? But I'm not entirely sure what it's advising there.
Makes me think of copay. Somebody decides to
Co-sign. Yeah, yes, it's very much like that. But I don't know what it means. Hold it in pledge if he does it for a wayward woman. I'm not sure. Verse 17, food gained by fraud tastes sweet to a man, but he ends up with a mouthful of gravel. Right? And that's evil. Sin is usually enticing and appealing at first. Sin usually seems fun or good or rewarding in the short term, but in the long term, it brings sorrow. Right? And that's why I would say the commandments are good. The commandments are not God telling you not to have fun. The commandments are God telling you how to have a good life. And breaking them, doing what's wrong, no one would ever do wrong if it was always unappealing, right? The reason people do bad things is because at that time it seems good to them, right? It seems like it'll get them what they want. But if you look in the long term, it doesn't. Does that make sense? Make plans by seeking advice. If you wage war, obtain guidance. A gossip betrays a confidence, so avoid a man who talks too much. Gossip is a big problem in churches too. I think it's a big problem today among everyone really. But gossip, this says gossip betrays a confidence, right? Sharing gossip is a breach of trust. I think it was Socrates who had 3 tests for anything that you're going to share, right? If you're going to tell a story, you're going to share something, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. First, is it true? And if it doesn't pass that test, then you shouldn't share it, obviously. And you should make sure and this is good advice for these days of social media, Before you post something, you should make sure it's true. If you don't know, then don't share it. But first, so Socrates said, before you share a piece of information, is it true? Second, is it good? Right? Is it good or bad good or bad news? Meaning, is it negative or positive? If it's positive, you could go ahead and share it. If it's negative, then you have to go to the next question. Then the last question is, if it's true but it's negative, then the third question is it helpful? Can anything good? So if you've got something that's true about someone and it's negative about them, does sharing it actually do any good? And if the answer is no, you shouldn't, even if it's true and even if it's negative. If it can do some good, then there might be a reason. So anyway, I always use that whenever I preach or whenever I teach, and I tell young people this too. Those are the three questions you should ask before you call up your friend and share something about another friend. Is it true? Is it good? And is it helpful? Anyway, verse 20, if a man curses his father or mother, his lamp will be snuffed out in pitch darkness. That's one of the commandments, honor your father and mother. An inheritance quickly gained at the beginning will not be blessed at the end. And I wonder if it's hard to tell what that refers to also, but I wonder if it refers to, there always have been and there still are today people who try to get inheritances by deceptive means, right? Con men who find a rich widow and pretend to be in love with her and get married and then get her to write him in and then take her money, right? Back in the Roman days, these were called legacy hunters, but people who would try to take advantage of people by getting into their wills and inheritance. And this says to be careful. There's a warning here to be careful of that. An inheritance quickly gained at the beginning will not be blessed at the end. Do not say, I'll pay you back for this wrong. Wait for the Lord and he will deliver you. And that's advice not to take revenge. Right? Don't take revenge yourself, because revenge is dangerous. Right? There's the old saying, if you're going to take revenge, first dig 2 graves. Because when we take revenge, it often brings calamity on us. So this says, don't take revenge, let God take care of it. Let God dispense the punishments. Verse 23, the Lord detests differing weights, and dishonest scales do not please him. That's a repetition. A man's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can anyone understand his own way? And that's what I was saying in the beginning, right? The idea that the human being is a mystery even to himself, right? That's what it says. We are guided by the Lord, but how can we don't know? We don't even fully understand ourselves, right? How many of you have done something and you weren't even sure why you did it, right? Life is like that. We often, that's why we go to therapists, right? We have a whole industry of psychology that helps people understand themselves. And the reason that exists is because we don't understand ourselves. We don't know why we do the things we do. We don't know why we feel the way we feel. So that's just the depth of mystery of a human being is very deep. Verse 25, it is a trap for a man to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider his vows. Right? So don't make promises without carefully thinking them out, is what that's saying. A wise king winnows out the wicked. He drives the threshing wheel over them. That's again a repetition back of verse 8 that says that the king winnows. And right, winnowing, do you know what that means? Some of you may know what it means better than me. I know it's an agricultural terms of the way you separate the good crop from the husk or everything else. You winnow out, right? And Jesus uses the same term to describe judgment. Jesus says the Son of Man is coming and the winnowing fork is in his hands. I've never seen a winnowing fork. Maybe somebody watching knows what a winnowing fork looks like. But I know what the metaphor means. It's about separating. And that's what I was saying earlier about the key is to be able to distinguish out good and evil. And you have to be able to make that distinction. So, and a wise king is able to do that. Verse 27, the lamp of the Lord searches the spirit of a man. It searches out his inmost being. Like God is the only one who sees inside of us and really understands our hearts. That's one of the themes of this chapter. We don't understand other people. We don't understand ourselves. but God understands us, right? Better than we understand ourselves. Verse 28, love and faithfulness keep a king safe. Through love, his throne is made secure. The glory of young men is their strength, the gray hair, the splendor of the old. That's a beautiful verse, right? What's it saying there? That, the glory of youth is that they're strong and fast and can do things, but there's also a glory of the aged, right? And that's their experience and their knowledge. Verse 30, blows and wounds cleanse away evil, and beatings purge the inmost being. I don't know if that's recommending beating people to make them more righteous. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I agree with that as good advice, but that reminds me, there was when I used to help lead youth group, we put up a big flag in the youth room that said the beatings will continue until morale improves. It's a pirate. It's like an old pirate joke, right? The beatings will continue until morale improves. It's sort of it's a satirical thing, sort of making fun of the idea that giving beatings will be useful or productive in some way. I'm a little perplexed at verse 30, what that might mean.
Mine sounds different. It says sometimes it takes a painful experience to make us change our ways.
Okay, that's a very, very different translation. So Linda says, her translation says, what? Say it again?
Sometimes it takes a painful experience to make us change our ways.
Sometimes it takes a painful experience to make us change our ways. Yeah. I like that better.
Makes sense.
That changed it to sound more descriptive, right? That sometimes we don't change until and that people are like that, right? Most people are not going to change until it's really uncomfortable for them not to change, right? They almost have to be forced to. I like that because it doesn't sound like a justification for beating your subjects or your children or whatever. All right, chapter 21. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He directs it like a watercourse wherever he pleases. All a man's ways seem... Why is the stuff about kings in here? Well, because who's writing this? Supposedly. We remember who the supposed author of Proverbs is? If Solomon. That's right. Good job, Linda. Yeah. So Solomon was a king, and the idea is he's writing this to his children. So he's giving advice to his children about how to rule, how to be king. Okay, verse 2. All a man's ways seem right to him, but the Lord weighs the heart. That's another descriptive statement that really finds broad application in our lives, I think. That's all a man's ways seem right to him. We always think we're right. Right? That's why humility, and that's why I think it's silly when people say, and I'll be quite honest here and personal, that's a criticism I've received in the past, is Aaron always thinks he's right. And my response is, well, everybody thinks they're right. If you thought you were wrong, you would change your opinion. Nobody says, I think I'm wrong, but I believe this. Like everyone thinks they're right. That's it's silly. It would be silly to do otherwise. If you think you're wrong, then you change your mind. But the point, though, is that it's God alone who really knows the truth. Verse 3, to do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. That's a key theme in the Bible, especially in the prophets. And that's a warning, I think, too, for Christians today, is our version, we don't sacrifice, but what's our version of sacrifice? It's probably worship. Worship is what we bring to God, right? To give him. Worship is our sacrifice. It's our offering. And what this is saying then therefore applies to you as a Christian. And in other words, coming to church every week and singing and so on is good. And believe me, I think you should do it because, that's my job. But it is more important that you do what is right than that you come to church every week. There were people back in ancient times, and just as there are people today, who thought that, well, if I make my sacrifices, or if I come to church and I believe the right things and I sing the songs, then I don't have to worry about how I behave. Right? And that's a mistake. And that's what the saying, that God, to do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Isaiah says the same thing many times. Haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked are sin. Pride is always, and you always see, you're seeing these two things contrasted, right? You see humility lifted up and you see pride condemned, because they're two sides of the same coin. Verse 5, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. So someone who thinks ahead and is thoughtful and makes plans is going to do better than someone who doesn't. A fortune made by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a deadly snare. If you get rich by lying, it's going to turn against you. We sort of know that's true to some extent, but wish it were more true, or that it happened faster. But it is possible to get rich by lying, but otherwise it wouldn't be saying it. Does that make sense? The violence of the wicked will drag them away, for they refuse to do what is right. The way of the guilty is devious, but the conduct of the innocent is upright. Better to live on a corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. I shouldn't say anything. I shouldn't say anything more about that. Verse 10, the wicked man craves evil, his neighbor gets no mercy from him. When a mocker is punished, the simple gain wisdom. When a wise man is instructed, he gets knowledge. The righteous one takes note of the house of the wicked and brings the wicked to ruin. Right? This is more of the idea that that people who do bad things get punished and people who do good things get rewarded. The righteous, verse 13, if a man shuts his ears to the cry of the poor, he too will cry out and not be answered. I love these verses. There's many of them, and the prophets say the same thing, right? If you ignore the plight of the poor, God will not hear your prayers. And that's in Deuteronomy, so it's in the law, it's in Moses, it's in some of the prophets. But those who ignore the suffering of the poor, says God will essentially ignore them too. A gift given in secret soothes anger, and a bribe concealed in the cloak pacifies great wrath. And that's more description. I don't think it's recommending doing bribes. When justice is done, it brings joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. When justice, that's obvious, but when justice is done, it's not good for the bad people, but it's good for the righteous. A man who strays from the path of understanding comes to rest in the company of the dead. He who loves pleasure will become poor. Whoever loves wine and oil will never be rich. I've had people who are pretty well off tell me that they think one of the main ways to have money is not to spend it.
Not to spend it?
Right.
I'm amazed at hearing early on in this shutdown thing. I mean, on the radio, people were saying, "We've saved so much money, $400-500 just in eating out."
Yeah.
People eat out so much, and it's just
Yeah.
wow.
If you like.
So if you want to
This is good
your
advice for
money,
me
go.
because I like wine and good food, and I like a good meal out. So it's good advice to be careful about that. The wicked become a ransom for the righteous, and the unfaithful for the upright. And that's just another affirmation that the evil will eventually get what they deserve. Better to live in a desert than with a quarrelsome and ill-tempered wife. There it is again.
Over and over.
So I will say this.
Wilderness.
this, I crack myself up at. So my wife and I, one of the places we've gone a few times, is we go up to McCall, and we've gone in the winter to see those ice sculptures. And I've never done this before. And maybe it's fun. I guess it is. Other people won't. But you see in the winter, you see the lake up in McCall. You see these ice fishermen, and I just think you must want to get away from your wife really bad to go sit out there in the freezing cold with a pole and a line in the water to catch fish. Like that, my theory was these men are all out there to get away from their wives, because why else would you do that? But it must be
good.
it must be fun. I don't know though. But so yeah, it's better to live in a desert or to go ice fishing than with a quarrelsome wife. Verse 20, in the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has. He who pursues righteousness and love finds life, prosperity, and honor. A wise man attacks the city of the mighty and pulls down the stronghold in which they trust. He who guards his mouth and his tongue keeps himself from calamity. The proud and arrogant man, mocker is his name. He behaves with overweening pride. The sluggard's craving will be the death of him. Right? The lazy, and in this kind of laziness and excessive desire go together, and those are the ways to poverty. All day long he craves for more, but the righteous give without sparing. The sacrifice of the wicked is detestable. How much more so when brought with evil intent? That's that same theme again, right? Those who worship but are wicked, that's the worst thing, right? Because it's hypocrisy. A false witness will perish, and whoever listens to him will be destroyed forever. A wicked man puts up a bold front, but an upright man gives thought to his ways. There is no wisdom, no insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. Okay, any questions there? Oh, Linda says, Happy Hanukkah, Aaron. Thanks. Yep, we are going to be doing Hanukkah with our kids. They love the candles. So thanks. That's, by the way, earlier we were talking about the books that Catholics have in the Bible. They're called Apocrypha. They're not bad. They're good books. And Martin Luther, for instance.
The extra books.
Yeah, the extra books they're good books. Martin Luther, for instance, who started the Protestant Reformation, he thought those books should be read. He just didn't think they should be with the Bible. But he thought they were. Anyway, my point, I do have a relevant point. One of the things that comes out of those books is the story of Hanukkah. Yeah. So those intertestamental books that Catholics have, the story of Hanukkah is in there. We're chapter 22. A good name is more desirable than great riches. That your reputation counts more than your bank account. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. Rich and poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. A prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. Right? That's this idea that the Proverbs sees the world as a dangerous place and is giving us warnings, right? Where are the pitfalls? Where are the places that you can get in trouble in the world? And a wise person heeds those warnings, but a foolish person just goes. Verse 4, humility and the fear of the Lord bring wealth and honor and life. Notice how those are linked. Humility and the fear of the Lord. They're really the same thing, in a sense. In the paths of the wicked lie thorns and snares, but he who guards his soul stays far from them. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. That's a very commonly quoted verse. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Again, that's another verse that's not saying that this is how it should be, but a description of how it is. He who sows wickedness reaps trouble, and the rod of his fury will be destroyed. A generous man will himself be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor. Drive out the mocker, and out goes strife. Quarrels and insults are ended. He who loves a pure heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king for his friend. The eyes of the Lord keep watch over knowledge, but he frustrates the words of the unfaithful. The sluggard, again the lazy person, says, "There is a lion outside," or "I will be murdered in the streets." I don't know what that means. Why if you have a different translation, you can share it with me, because I'm not really sure what it's saying there.
This footnote is the lazy give lame excuses for not leaving the house to work.
Well, that could be. So that's a pretty reasonable option. Carla's Bible says that the lazy give unreasonable excuses for why they don't get out of the house and work. Right? They have irrational fears. Verse 14, the mouth of an adulteress is a deep pit. He who is under the Lord's wrath will fall into it. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. He who oppresses the poor to increase his wealth, and he who gives gifts to the rich, both come to poverty. And the Bible is full of this stuff. You know, the people, I think, today aren't aware, especially Christians, how much the Bible has to say about the poor and how they should be treated. The Bible really takes the side of the poor and has a lot of judgment for the rich. And this is just what I mean by that here is, right, it's saying the person who oppresses the poor to get rich, right? So if you take advantage of the poor and that's how you make your money, then God doesn't like that, and two, eventually, supposedly, it'll lead to your ruin. I could think of some examples. For instance, payday loan lenders who take advantage of people who, just need money to make the rent, but then charge them outrageously high interest. That's an example of a way people make money by taking advantage of somebody who's in trouble or needy or is in a bad spot. So verse 17, pay attention and listen to the sayings of the wise. Apply your heart to what I teach, for it is pleasing when you keep them in your heart and have all of them ready on your lips, so that your trust may be in the Lord. I teach you today, even you. Have I not written 30 sayings for you? This is kind of Solomon speaking to his son, teaching you true and reliable words so that you can give sound answers to him who sent you. Do not exploit the poor because they are poor, and do not crush the needy in court. Right? That's the wealthy always hire the best lawyers, right? So they can sue the poor and get their money. They can take the poor to court and make them pay. Nothing has changed in 3,000 years, but God condemns it. And this is, for the Lord will take up their case, right? Remember when I said God takes the side of the poor? Literally, that's what it says. Right? God takes up the case of the poor and will plunder those who plunder them, right? So God is the defender of the poor, and those who hurt and take advantage of the poor, well, God is going to do the same to them, is what it says. And again, don't get mad at me. I didn't write it. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his ways and get yourself ensnared. Do not be a man who strikes hands in pledge or puts up security for debts. That's what you were saying, Lena. Don't co-sign. And I think it means be careful. I mean, I've never but my parents, when I was young and in seminary and I got my first apartment, my parents had to co-sign on my apartment in case I couldn't pay the rent or whatever. But maybe that was unwise of them. But they never had to pay, so it worked out. Verse 27, if you lack the means to pay, your very bed will be snatched from under you. Do not move an ancient boundary stone set up by your forefathers. Those boundary stones kind of marked where property lines were, and saying don't move those. And that has to do, this came up, I don't know when this came up, maybe in our Thursday evening Bible study, but There was in ancient Israel this thing called the Year of Jubilee, and it was every seventh sabbatical year. So after the 49th year was the Year of Jubilees, and one of the things that would happen in the Year of Jubilee is that all the land would go back to its original owners. And the reason for that was it was kind of setting the slate level and clean. Because over time, what can happen is people have to mortgage their land, especially so it's an agricultural economy, and people might have to mortgage their land or sell their property in order to pay debts. But the idea is that the Year of Jubilee kept that, and what that would cause is inequality, right? Some people would own all the land and other people would just be tenant farmers. And the Year of Jubilee reset everything back to even, right? All the land goes back to its original family ownership. And it kept inequality from getting out of control. Anyway, that's one reason why it would be important not to move those boundary markers that were set by your forefathers, right? And you might be tempted to do that. Let's say you were a successful farmer and you bought someone's land because they needed to sell it to pay their debts or whatever. You eventually, you'd have to give that back. But while you owned it, you might be tempted to move the boundary marker in a way that would be advantageous to you so that when everything reset, you would have more. And it's a warning not to do that. Okay, where were we? Verse 29. Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will serve before kings. He will not serve before obscure men. Right? So if you're skillful, you will rise. Let's see if we can get done with chapter 23. We've got about 10 minutes. When you sit to dine with a ruler, note well what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to gluttony. Do not crave his delicacies, for that food is deceptive. So you dine with a rich man. Don't be careful. Don't get addicted to the luxuries, to the caviar and the 40-year-old champagne or whatever he serves you. Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. Right? So have balance in your life. Don't be a workaholic. Don't make earning money the sole focus of your life. There's other things. Right? So there's a balance to Proverbs. On the one hand, it does tell you don't be lazy. But on the other hand, it says don't overwork. So balance is the key. Cast but a glance at riches, and they are gone, for they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle. Don't count on your wealth, because it's here today and gone tomorrow. Do not eat the food of a stingy man. Do not crave his delicacies, for he is the kind of man who is always thinking about the cost. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. You will vomit up the little you have eaten and will have wasted your compliments. So this is a person who, only gives gifts in a very calculated way so that they can get something in return. Do not speak to a fool, for he will scorn the wisdom of your words. Right? That you can't tell a fool anything, so don't bother. They're not going to listen. Do not move an ancient boundary stone or encroach on the fields of the fatherless, for their defender is strong. Who's their defender? Who's the defender of the fatherless? God. Yeah. Again, that's when I say that God takes the side of the poor and the orphan and the widow, that's because the Bible says he does. He will take up their case against you, right? God will take their side against you. Apply your heart to instruction and your ears to words of knowledge. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish him with the rod, he will not die. Punish him with the rod and save his soul from death. Maybe that's what it was saying earlier about beatings, helping somebody correct themselves. Verse 15, my son, if your heart is wise, then my heart will be glad. My inmost being will rejoice when your lips speak what is right. And they're the kind of the breakthrough of Solomon's personal voice saying, son, make me proud, right? Follow wisdom and you will make me happy. Verse 17, do not let your heart envy sinners, but always be zealous for the fear of the Lord. So don't envy sinners. It's kind of hard not to do that sometimes. And that gets to the heart of what we're doing here in studying Proverbs and Ecclesiastes is to look at this basic theme that the wicked suffer and the righteous prosper. And that happens sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. But there's a temptation, right, to envy sinners, right? Someone who's enjoying a sin, it can be easy to be envious of them. Does that make sense? Is that something you've ever...
It does, but when you get old like me, you realize they're not going to be happy. I mean, it like goes away. You realize that's fake.
Yeah.
That's not anything to want.
Yeah.
To be a sinner in order to have stuff and
yeah,
it's nothing.
Yeah, you can.
Age.
It can be this envying sinners. Can be sitting at home watching your TV and seeing someone like, let's say, like Jeffrey Epstein, right? Because follow the news, you know who he is. No, yes, he would.
Is he the one that had the island?
Yeah, he was super rich and he had this island and he took advantage of a lot of young girls. Anyway, but it's easy to watch and say, man, he was an evil man. But look, he got to live in luxury and owned an island and ate the best food. And I don't know that I particularly envy him, but
yeah, it's hard. Well, we know the end of the story, so
yeah, it didn't turn out well for him. But there is.
But if he were still alive, we'd just think he's disgusting, and who won?
Yeah, it is disgusting. So I guess that's not a good example because he's pretty despicable.
Terrible.
But it can be tempting sometimes, I think, to envy sinners because they might be having fun that you're not having, right? But if you're wise, like you're saying, Carla, if you've lived long enough, you know that it's not going to turn out well. Okay, verse 18, there is surely a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off. Listen, my son, and be wise, and keep your heart on the right path. Do not join those who drink too much wine, or gorge themselves on meat. For drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy the truth, and do not sell it. Get wisdom, discipline, and understanding. Buy the truth, and do not sell it. Pursue truth and wisdom above all. The father of a righteous man has great joy. He who has a wise son delights in him. May your father and mother be glad. May she who gave you birth rejoice. My son, give me your heart, and let your eyes keep to my ways. For a prostitute is a deep pit, and a wayward wife is a narrow well. Like a bandit she lies in wait, and multiplies the unfaithful among men. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. In the end it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Your eyes will see strange sights, and your mind imagine confusing things. You will be like one sleeping on the high seas, lying on the top of the rigging. They hit me, you will say, but I'm not hurt. They beat me, but I don't feel it. When will I wake up so I can find another drink? This is a long kind of description of the plight of the drunk.
It's funny.
But yeah, that's another Proverbs is definitely strong on warning against the evils of alcohol. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our time. Thanks to everybody. I think if we work hard, we might be able to finish Proverbs next week. We'll have to go pretty fast. But we made it pretty far today.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can do even more next week. Let me close us with prayer. Lord, help us to seek wisdom and to be humble. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.